Thank you, Cameron. Thanks for the nice introductory words. I'm here to say a few things about knowledge-based or evidence-based policy making, especially also later in my talk on what the Inspire work is contributing to that. But let me first say that I'm speaking on behalf of the Director General of the Joint Research Center, Mr. Dominic Ristori, who regrets he couldn't be here. But I'm very happy to be in his place because this very good group of workers led by Alessandro Annoni is in my institute, the institute that I'm the director of. So I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to also publicly say thank you very much to you, Alessandro, and the people working with these numerous people across Europe to get this piece of legislation implemented. So the Joint Research Center is like many other research institutes facing quite a set of challenges these days. One is the climate change issue. This is just the cover of the Time. Not so long ago. Should we be worried or should we be very worried? Or should we, like, I can't resist to quote a Dutch newspaper yesterday morning where a parliamentarian asked that the Royal Netherlands Meteorological Institute not get any subsidy anymore from the government because 20% of their co-workers was believing in climate change and thus the government shouldn't support them. Then, of course, next year is the year of water, and water is one of the most precious resources that we're dealing with. It's also getting scarcer in certain periods of the year and certain parts of the continents. So water, another major issue dealing with. Food and food security, more so in other parts of the world than Europe. But also the European Commission is dealing with questions of food security. Like we had a big workshop in March and we'll have another one in September dealing with the food security issues across the globe and also its impact on the European situation or how it's impacted by climate change. Getting back to the United Kingdom and say the word Blackpool, I think that's where shale gas is tried to be found. And here, from the Time again, this rock could power the world is, let's say, the new issues of resources and the new issues of environment related to that. And shale gas is certainly one of them. Not only in the United Kingdom, but also in the other parts of the world. And then the population issue. It's not the research topic of the Joint Research Center, but of course in all the work that we do, trying to look forward, trying to use scenarios, we have to calculate in what the global population is going to be about. We're approaching 7 billion. There are studies that say 9 billion later in this century will be the maximum and then it's leveling off. There's others that say it will still grow a bit. One major concern, of course, is that the growth take place in other parts of the world and the degrowth or the slowing down or the decrease actually is taking place in Europe. So for my talk, the next 15 minutes, it's the question, what kind of policy options do exist where Europe can try to minimize the impact of these global changes of which you just saw a few pictures, so that at least for Europe and its impact in the rest of the world, we can minimize the impacts or stimulate adaptation, for instance, in the case of climate change. Projections are difficult. Forecasts are even more difficult. And we know all that, say, the 1972 limits to growth study had it wrong looking back. But also it had a great impact in making us realize what we were heading for if not the measures could be taken to really limit the impact of our unsustainable growth in the 70s and before and also thereafter. But it's wrong to say that the study was wrong. It had a few assumptions wrong, and the models were not yet so clear, but it also had something like a self-destructing forecast or a self-destructing projection. I was reminded of a newspaper article a few years ago that said acid rain, 1980s issue, early 1990s issue, was a hoax because all the forests are still alive. But the author of that newspaper article forgot that in that period, the emissions of sulfur dioxide had declined by 80 to 85%. Of course, then you don't see the impacts that one would have expected if there wouldn't have been a reduction, or even more so if the growth had continued like it continued before the 1980s. So my message there is be careful by saying that these type of studies got it wrong, because these type of studies have, if it's going well, the tendency to be self-destructing because governments are going to take measures. So in all of this, these global change issues, what does the European Commission, what does the Joint Research Centre contribute? And for those of you who do not exactly know where we sit, this is a picture of the European Commission, its various commissioners, and also the place of the Joint Research Centre. We are a Directorate General in the European Commission. Our commissioner is Moira Gaggan-Quinn for Research, Innovation and Science. Our Director General is Dominique Ristori. We are next to the Research and Innovation Director General that most of you also know, because you might have been involved in trying to get some money from them for all kinds of projects. Our mission is to provide scientific and technical support for EU policies in various parts, various stages of the policy cycle. And I'll give a few examples in one of the next slides. In the last year and a half, the JSC has been discussing and also deciding on its vision. That is, where do we want to be in the next decade or so? And then I think there's an important sentence just in the middle of the slide which says that we have to be, we will be in 10 years or so, a trusted provider of science-based policy options to EU policymakers to address key challenges facing our society, underpinned by internationally recognized research. So from the research base, trying to, early on in the stages of policy development, chip in the knowledge that is needed to make these policies better. Better in the sense of science-based, knowledge-based, but also better in the sense of trying to provide better outputs to contribute to the goals of, for instance, Europe 2020, that the Minister also referred to. A slide that has the policy cycle over there. And when I want to characterize the Joint Research Centre's role, we're more in the, let's say, policy formulation boxes, and also in the ad hoc policy support box, and more in the policy anticipation box. But let's say implementation is not our basis, at least is not what we mainly do. Of course, in all kinds of pieces of legislation we are assisting, for instance in Inspire, but not, let's say, in general. More and more the Joint Research Centre wants to assist the other Directors General to do some forward-looking studies. For instance, what could happen to the, let's say, the availability of phosphorus, which is very important for agriculture. We used to have a problem with it 20, 25 years ago, and now we might have a shortage of it in the coming years. So we have to do some studies to find out what actually is happening. In the policy formation, or policy formulation, the JSC has always been heavily involved in issues like vehicle standards, air pollution standards or air quality standards, the implementation of the Common Agricultural Policy, and many things more. In crisis response, our contribution is, for instance, to develop warning systems like the European Flood Warning System, EFAS, that uses a combination of satellite observations, meteorological data, and models to do some projections with a probability whether large international rivers have a tendency to flood in the next 5, 6, 7, or 8 days. That's a system that is being used all over Europe adjacent to the national warning systems. A similar system exists for European forest fires, where we try to work with the local and national authorities to project where the forest fire might go, and also to assist the European Commission in deciding where its spare firefighting planes might be going to when there are multiple fires in Europe, like in Portugal and Spain, Greece, or Italy. So when looking at Europe 2020, also included in your conference's title, we contribute to issues of the Innovation Union, impact assessments and anticipation, but also, and that's of course much more relevant for this conference, to standardization, harmonization, and also some research that precedes the standardization. The priorities at the moment are across the JRC, say in energy and clean transport. They're very important. They're, of course, large contributors to the goals of Europe 2020, but also in such issues as agriculture and food security, environment and climate change, the ICT strategies, and issues of safety and security. And in the next 5 minutes, I'll give a few examples of some of those issues. But first, a bit of the general approach, because the JSC, I think, is gradually moving from a pure natural science and engineering-driven organization to one that is more and more trying to integrate results from different sciences, to combine it with knowledge from the social sciences, especially economics, and so in its assistance, in its working with the policy DGs, trying to combine the issues of environment and society also from a scientific point of view, so that in the end we will be able to do more of an integration, to do more of an integrated assessment rather than an ad hoc policy by policy or sector by sector analysis of the options. That's a challenge which we are going to go for in the next five years or so. We're not yet there, but it's the current goal is to really do more of the integration. The things bothering us when doing that integration are partially also your concern, I think, because they have to do with the data that the Joint Research Center and all modelers are dealing with or have to deal with. There are issues of gaps in data. There are issues of the difficulties to access data because there are different data policies, semantics and language issues, comparability, lack of comparability, undocumented data quality. And in the discussion I had with the staff at IES, at the Institute for Environment and Sustainability, various, let's say, obvious examples came up. Like, for instance, in the size basis study, one found out that although the people doing the monitoring of biodiversity were very good, But then the data handling coming out of that biodiversity was rather poor. They did it on the cheap. Another issue, which is very important for us when we want to interpret the data that come from monitoring stations, for instance, for air quality, when you have latitude and longitude with 2 decimals only, and you're in a hilly terrain, the monitoring station can be up the hill or in the valley. And it makes quite a difference for us to interpret the data when the station is up the hill or when it's down in the valley. So there, let's say the latitude and longitude should be very precise, otherwise the data are not useful at all for using for projections, for instance, of long-range transport of air pollutants. So there's a whole series of data that come from in situ, or also, on the other hand, from satellite, where comparability, where harmonization, where ease of interpretation are very important. And of course, it's one of the roles of INSPIRE and the INSPIRE directive to make that happen, to make it happen across Europe, and also not only the current Europe 27, but also future member states. And not only in Europe and its future member states, but also in relation to the global Earth observation data. So the GEOS initiative to see that what we do is also in accordance and is communicable with other data sets coming from other parts of the world. So I have at the end 2 examples that I want to share with you. The first of all is that in the work we do, we use more and more various layers of data covering all of Europe, but they come from all kinds of different backgrounds and disciplines. There's forest, and there's land use, there's other land use, there's air pollution, there's population data, there's economics, etc. And so when we want to do this integrating tasks that I described a few minutes ago, we have to be able to simply put all these layers on top of each other. Of course, it's more difficult than just putting them on top of each other. So that, for instance, when we do an application of life cycle analysis with a geographical or regional component, we have access to the data that we need to really perform that type of analysis. Climate change is a very complicated issue where thousands and thousands of researchers are working on, and we have to try to use that and bring it into a form and a format that policymakers in Brussels and the other DGs can work with it. So starting from socioeconomic scenarios, for us it's important then to derive what kind of land use would that imply, and from our colleagues in the climate area, mostly in large institutions like the Hadley Center in the United Kingdom or the institutes in Germany and the United States to run their climate models, where for us then scenarios of land use in the top level appear, and then our colleagues in climate come up with high resolution climate scenarios. So that then has to be linked and brought together. For instance, when we want to analyze the increase of risk or the decrease of risk, we have to confront those scenarios of land use with exposure, derive vulnerability for the people, and also then think about, with models we have, whether the frequency of disasters or floods or anything like that might increase over time and come at the end to something like a risk assessment. Staying at this international level, the JRC contributes to many international agreements. There's lots of acronyms across the slide here, starting at the left-hand side, what the Americans call LRTAP, the Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution Convention in Geneva. Then there's the Climate Change Convention, there is the Biodiversity Convention, and the Desertification Convention. At the bottom, you see examples of how the JRC is contributing. The left-hand side is a monitoring station with one of the European air pollution monitoring stations at the site in Ispra. In the middle, there is a map related to agriculture and agricultural vulnerability. And then more to the right is the biodiversity, and at the far right is various layers that we use to try and look forward to what the certification might mean in Europe. And we do that in two ways. We work with these international conventions, and you see some arrows there, through their scientific bodies. There is a monitoring program in Europe for air pollution. At the left-hand side is EMAP. There is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. There's GCOS, there's the Millennium Ecosystems Assessment. There is, let's say, the scientific contribution to the international development of international protocols. But for us, the arrow also goes upwards, because the European Commission is a partner in many of these international protocols, and they need to be supported. They're of course supported through their own directors general, but when it comes to scientific advice, there's, say, the arrows from the top to the bottom go straight forward there. So that's another role of the JRC I want to emphasize here, the contribution to the international, the beyond European borders policies that the Commission, or the European Union actually, is contributing to. We do all that with lots and lots of models and data. There's about 2,800 people working at the Joint Research Center in 7 institutes, so you can imagine there's a lot of that. I just have a list for you to look at, more, let's say, to impress you. I'm not going to say anything on any of them, apart from the fact that Inspire plays a very important role in many of these, because we need to have them combinable, accessible, and usable. And that's, even at the level of the, let's say, the JRC itself, is a difficult task. Not everything is already, let's say, in an Inspire frame. So, another slide that don't try to understand all the words is what they're there, but it's the early warning system for floods, which is a European-wide system where we combine meteorology and land and catchments and all kinds of hydrology and impacts on habitats or households, etc. With modeling, observations, Earth observations, and also, let's say, in situ observations, where the definition of the data and the use of the data, of course, is very important. And one of the colleagues from Alessandro's group has overlaid this set with some important functions of Inspire. So I don't know all these numbers there, but for some of you they're very well known. So here is kind of the link in concrete terms between the Inspire work and the modeling work at the JRC. So in conclusion, the JRC is working hard with the other policy DGs to realize the Europe 2020 goals. We do that through our evidence-based policy making by more and more doing integrated assessments, anticipation studies, and contributing to standardization. And in that respect is, let's say, Inspire the double-edged sword, where standard setting and innovation potential is one, and then, that was my point this morning, the contribution to better decision making is the other one. I thank you for your attention.